What are you worried about right now? What's on your mind? What's concerning you? This day, this week. It's the Easter long weekend, but it's a difficult time, and so there's different things troubling us. Some of us are worried about how we're going to get through the day, what we can do, what we can't do. Will I go and visit my kids or not? Some of us are concerned about how we're going to get through these school holidays with the kids at home and no teachers. Some of us are concerned about how we're going to just do life. Like, it's so long since I've seen my friends, I'm bored, I'm stressed, how am I going to get through? Some of us are concerned about how we're going to pay the mortgage because I'm a cook, my job, I've lost it. Some of us are concerned about what the virus is going to do because I'm older and it might get me. What are you concerned about? What are you worrying about? What are you troubled about right now? Because it's a time of trouble and it's a time of many concerns. And I ask that because it's possible for Christians to actually be concerned about the wrong things. It's possible for our concerns to be too small. Mary is a good example of that. The two Marys and Salome, they're going to the tomb and they want to honour Jesus. So they've got absolutely fantastic motives. See in verse 1 of chapter 16 of Mark's Gospel, so that they could go and anoint him. You see, the crucifixion happened in a rush because it was all kind of crooked and unfair. And then he was killed late on the Friday night and kind of just put in a tomb by his friends. But he hadn't been prepared properly because there was kind of customs of anointing and wrapping. And so they're planning to go the next possible day, because the Saturday they can't do anything because that's the day of rest. You're not allowed to do activities. But the first thing on the Sunday morning, they're going over to help. That's verse 2. But they're concerned about a real legitimate concern. And all our concerns at the moment, they're legitimate. Like, things aren't, it's not wrong to be concerned about my future and my job and my work and my kids and my family and my connections. But they're concerned about the stone. Look at that in verse 3. Who's going to roll the stone from the entrance to the tomb for us? Because a bunch of strong guys can move it, but these three ladies, they just not sure how they're going to do that. So they're like, well, maybe we'll be able to find someone. Maybe we'll get the gardener and maybe there'll be some people around. We'll get some help. That's their concern. That they want to honour Jesus, and that's good motives, but they're concerned about this thing they're not going to be able to do. It's not going to be possible for us to move this stone. But what's really interesting is how God goes before them, and their concern actually doesn't matter at all. Because look at verse 4, boom. Looking up, they noticed that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. The stone's gone. So they're concerned about how we're going to move that stone, and God's already taken care of it, but God's done so much more. Have a look at verse 5, because they go and look in the tomb in verse 5, and they see a man dressed in white, a white robe, sitting on the right side. We know from the other Gospels this is an angel. Verse 6, don't be alarmed, you're looking for Jesus of Nazareth. So the angel knows what they're doing. They didn't have to explain. Who was crucified. And there's some facts there. He was killed. That's a reminder of the truths. The spear in the side, no need to break his knees. He had died. He was dead. He was crucified. But he is risen. He is not here. See the place where they put him. And look, see, there's the proof. Look, ladies, he was on that bench there, that stone bench, and he's gone. And he says, go and tell the disciples and Peter, he's going ahead of you to Galilee. You'll see them there just as he told you. And at this point, a lot of things begin to make sense for the disciples when they see Jesus. The things he told them about, I'm going away, but then I'll come back, which were a bit cryptic before, a bit like listening to one side of a conversation because they didn't get the context. If you ever listen to your wife talking on the phone to one of her friends, they very rarely use nouns and things like that. It says, oh yeah, I know, but then he wasn't, she wasn't, I know. You don't have the context to understand what's going on, and so you don't understand. But later on when things happen and you see what the story develops, you go, oh, that's what you were talking about. Oh, I get it now. And that's what happens to the disciples. They start to understand, and it changes everything. Because they go out and they run. They were walking to the tomb, now they're running because there's a greater urgency, because they've got this amazing, astonishing news, and it changes their priorities. It does say that they go and they said nothing to anyone since they were afraid. What I understand from that is they said nothing to anyone else because they were given instructions to go and tell Peter and the disciples. And so they do that. It's like, we're not going to tell the gardener, we're not going to tell the authorities, we're not going to stop. We'll go and tell Peter, because we know from the other Gospels that they do tell Peter. But their focus has changed from being a bit worried about the stone. The stone was not going to be the problem. Now they're just focused on telling Peter the good news that they have. It changes everything. So their response is in astonishment to go and be concerned now about letting people know about what has happened. There's a little bit of danger. They're afraid of the authorities, so they're not going to tell anybody, but they just go and do that job. And I think that's something that perhaps we need to, I guess, be aware of, is that the resurrection, this day that we celebrate today, changes things and changes our focus. Because God has gone before us. I want you to think about this as we worry about what's going to happen in our society, as we worry about what's going to happen to us and our families. We need to remember that God has gone before us. The stone has been rolled away and Christ is now alive. And so Jesus has gone before us into life, into eternal life. So when we gather on a Sunday, Easter Sunday morning, and the leader up the front says he is risen, and we all say he is risen indeed, we're not just talking about him, we're reminding that we too will rise to life, and it changes our focus. The concerns we had before, and even some of the little things we're trying to do, the way we're trying to live our lives, they get... We kind of change it and become more focused on eternal things. Let me read Colossians chapter 3. So if you've been raised with Christ, seek the things above, where Christ is, seated at the right hand of God. Set your mind on things above, not on earthly things, for you died. And your life is hidden with Christ in God. When Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with him in glory. Your life is hidden with Christ. It's kind of the idea of being kept safe, being secure, like you hide your valuables in a safe, in a strong box. Our lives are hidden with Christ. When he comes, we'll be raised to life with him. And so the apostle says, then think about eternal things and set your mind on eternal things. So I want to challenge you to look up as this coronavirus kind of shuts us down and damages our lifestyle and threatens our lives. It should be a moment of reflection for all of us, of what really matters, of what our priorities are. And it helps us to think about what we live for. What do you live for? What are you most concerned about? What are you focusing on? What are you doing? What are you concentrating on? And a big question to ask is, how much of it is things of eternal value? How much of it is running to tell others? Are you concerned about me, but also, are you concerned about others? That is, how many other folk will be raised to life on that last day? I know I'm okay, but actually the things that I was focused on a month ago don't seem quite so important when I think about what might happen to my loved ones. Am I discipling my kids? Am I talking to my brother and my sister? Do my neighbours know? My parents are old. How long have they got? My focus has changed, and I've been challenged to think about eternal things. And I want to encourage you that this is a time for that to happen. Easter in a pandemic is a time to realise what matters. You know the story of John Newton, don't you? He wrote that beautiful song, Amazing Grace, the most well-known song in the world. He wrote that song, Amazing Grace, after he became a Christian. He was a slave trader, a captain of a ship that sold slaves. He did terrible things to people. He did terrible things with people. He was a drunkard. He was he swore a lot. He hurt people. He took advantage of people. He was angry and violent. And the things that they did to those people captured by slavery are just horrific. He actually got captured himself and became a slave to an African lady on Africa, and he set a fire one day and was rescued by the captain of another ship, and he was on that ship sailing home when a storm came over, and the whole ship was in danger of sinking. And it was that day, the 10th of March, 1748, that John Newton, in desperate fear of death, in terror of the destruction that was coming, actually started to think about whether he actually had any hope of eternity, and decided that he didn't. And it was in that moment when he was encouraged to cry out to God for mercy, mercy for the ship, mercy for the sailors, mercy in this storm, and they're all thinking about just surviving the storm, that John Newton, thinking about mercy, realised, I have no right for mercy, I can't ask for mercy. And he realised that he actually needed to be thinking about mercy for his eternal soul. And that was the moment that he surrendered to God and became a Christian, and sang that song and wrote later on that song that speaks of God's mercy, Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And John Newton became a powerful figure, a pastor of a church. He wrote hundreds of letters, he wrote many tracts, a lifetime of sermons after that. But also he was a key mover in the emancipation movement that ended slavery in England and eventually around most of the world, because in that moment of fear, he saw the eternal and he realised how much that mattered. I want to encourage you. Don't worry about who's going to roll the stone. Don't worry about how you're going to, do the things you've got to do. Like, I'm not saying don't do them, but don't worry about also, keep your mind on also the things that matter forever. What are you doing for the kingdom in your street? What are you doing for those who don't have hope at this time? Are you looking to God and trusting in Him, because that's our only salvation? Colossians 3, let me read it again. So if you've been raised with Christ, which you have, seek the things above, where Christ is. He's alive, seated at the right hand of God. And set your mind on things above, not on earthly things, for you died when you became a Christian, and your life is hidden with Christ in God. You are safe with Jesus in God's hand. And when Christ, who's alive and King, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with Him in glory. God bless you this Easter as we're reminded that Christ truly is risen. He is risen indeed. God bless.